Hello, everyone. My name is Lynel, and today I will be presenting my topic, which is the Tennessee Valley Authority coal ash spill of 2008. So, first, let's talk about where this coal plant was located. The Tennessee Valley Authority Kingston Fossil Plant is located at the headwaters of the Watts Bar Reservoir near the joining of the Clinch and Emery Rivers in Harriman County, Tennessee. The plant itself generates about 10 billion kilowatt hours of electricity per year, which is enough to supply more than 670,000 homes in Tennessee Valley. Operation for the plant started in 1955, and it was the largest coal burning power plant in the world, and it held this distinction for more than a decade. In the late 1950s, the plant started emptying its coal ash directly into the Swan Pond embankment, and when dumping regulations changed, the Tennessee Valley Authority created a waste area. They call it like a waste cell in the bay for the coal ash. And over time, the waste area contents replace most of the water in the bay. So on December 22nd, 2008, at approximately 1 a.m., a retention structure in this waste area that contained the coal ash failed and released about 5.4 million cubic yards of the waste product into the adjacent river valley, covering about 400,000 acres of surrounding land, about 6 feet deep. 3 homes were destroyed. It damaged many others, about 42 properties, and contaminated the Emery and Clinch rivers. No immediate human fatalities took place, which I guess is the only good news from the immediate spill. So what is coal ash? So coal ash is a combination of fly ash and bottom ash, which is the waste product left over from coal that is combusted or burned. So fly ash consists of the fine powdery particles and minerals, plus a small amount of carbon that are carried up the smokestack by the exhaust gases. And bottom ash is a coarser material that falls to the bottom of the furnace. So the immediate risk from the spill was that the ash filled much of the channel, the Emery River, about 4 miles upstream and 7 miles downstream. There was an extremely large immediate fish kill in the area, and then the chemicals that were involved in the ash that was spilled contained arsenic, mercury, selenium, and lead, as well as trace elements. So the toxicants in coal ash vary depending on where the coal is mined, but the majority of them have high levels of arsenic, mercury, selenium, and lead, and that was found in the Tennessee spill. These chemicals are cancer-causing agent and cause neurologic damage in people. This slide just is a real quick overview of the major toxicants and where they harm in the body. And they also harm and kill wildlife, especially fish and other water-dwelling species. And I'll get to some of that research in a little bit. So the cleanup efforts involved a couple of phases. So basically, the ash spill had a significant effect on the community and the environment. And in May 2009, the EPA and the Tennessee Valley Authority entered into an administrative order of consent requiring the Tennessee Valley Authority to perform cleanup and restoration efforts under the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, or CERCLA. And the cleanup process ensured that the consideration of the revitalization and reuse of the site, as well as the surrounding area, were an integral part of their cleanup response. And so, like I said, they conducted the cleanup in 3 phases. Phase 1 was an 18-month time critical situation where 3.5 million cubic yards of fly ash from the river was removed, dried, dewatered, transported by rail car, and disposed of in Arrowhead landfill in Alabama. And that phase 1 was completed in May of 2010. So one of the important things I want to mention about this phase 1 completion of the cleanup was a site event specific exposure. The workers that were hired to clean the site by the company that did most of the cleanup were not provided personal protective equipment. And now that it's 10 years later, more than 30 workers are dead, 200 are sick, and it is thought to mostly be from the acute, intense exposure to the arsenic and radium. And there are many lawsuits currently in place trying to help get vindication for the workers that have either passed away or that are sick. Phase 2 of the cleanup was the mechanical removal of 2.3 million cubic yards of fly ash from the north and middle Swan Pond embankments and the Watts Bar Reservoir. So the ash was dried, spread, and compacted in a disposal cell of 240 acres. A large slurry wall was constructed, and then it was capped with polyethylene liner, topsoil, and a vegetative cover. And I'll show you pictures of that in a little bit. And that was completed in 2014. Phase 3 of the cleanup was part of a human health and ecologic risk assessment part of the plan. And there was studies that went along with this part of the cleanup, and they evaluated measurement endpoints for the coal-related impacts. They did some geochemistry studies, and they did sediment water bioassays. But some of the things that the cleanup did in this phase was ecologic revitalization and recreational revitalization, and I'll show you some pictures of what the site looks like today. And these stages were completed in 2015. This is actually just a large overview picture of what the area looks like today. So in the immediate, the fate of those spilled chemicals was that the anaerobic bacteria in the sediment that got filled into all the rivers in the area, the anaerobic bacteria were there, and the worry was that they would convert the mercury in the coal ash into the bioaccumulative and toxic form, methylmercury. And as the ash dried that wasn't in the water, the fine particles containing the toxins were all suspended in air and then moved through the community in the form of dust. And those particles then would be inhaled, and instead of being cleared out by your mucociliary clearance, they would get inhaled because the particles are so small, and they would lodge deep in the lungs and cause pulmonary problems. Interestingly, there was plenty of controversy on what this immediate large amount of coal ash would do to all the fish in the waters. And so there was a large study that actually took place to determine what the sediment would do to the fish species. And so in this study, fish embryos and larvae that were exposed to approximately 78% of the coal ash from the Kingston spill were examined in a 7-day laboratory study. And what they found was there was no significant effects observed in hatching success or incidence of developmental abnormalities. And the authors concluded that their results suggest that direct exposures to sediment containing coal ash from the Kingston spill may not present any significant risk to fish eggs and larvae in the waterways affected by the coal ash spill. Then another study was performed to evaluate the health of children living near coal ash, and the objective of this study was to evaluate the prevalence of health and sleep problems in children living near coal ash. This wasn't specifically the Tennessee Valley Authority spill, but I just wanted to point out that overall, in this study, 111 children who lived near coal ash were studied, and the findings showed that the odds of them having allergies, attention deficit issues, hyperactivity disorders, GI problems, difficulty sleeping, frequent night awakenings, sleep talking, and complaint of leg cramps were greater than children not living near any coal ash or non-exposed children. So it is suspected that the heavy metal components like lead, mercury, and arsenic are associated with these health and sleep problems in children's. And the authors then concluded that more research is needed to investigate the relationship. So another interesting study looked at evaluating the risk to wildlife from the coal fly ash, and this was actually from the Tennessee Valley Authority area. They could do this study with wildlife, which had never been able to be done before because the magnitude of the spill was large enough to provide the unique opportunity to assess the risk to wildlife from the residual fly ash that was in the aquatic system. And so their objectives were to use so they wanted to assess the risk to wildlife from the residual coal ash in the river system and determine whether the coal ash spills are of great risk, and then to help with long-term risk management, and also to help gather the information in order to contribute to the ongoing debate surrounding the regulations for coal and its combustible disposables. So actually, the results of this study showed that the risk to wildlife from the residual ash was actually low, and it was low for most species, but it was most pronounced for insectivores, birds, and those were the birds that were exposed to selenium and arsenic. So has the site recovered? Well, they have really, in my opinion, worked very hard at the cleanup and making this a usable area. So the phase two of the cleanup involves the big capped landfill area, and that has now become home to 240 acres of recreation and a park. Some of the ecologic revitalization that took place was they replanted the shoreline with native species of trees. They helped with conservation of existing wetlands by controlling water flow and planting of native species. They helped establishment of the aquatic habitat. So, for example, trees that were cut during the cleanup were placed in the water for fish habitat, and the wetlands were established where the ash was evacuated. They planted nearly 7,000 trees across 15 acres, over 40 types. They installed osprey and heron platforms in strategic locations to help nesting habitat and feeding opportunities in the area. And they had a whole revegetation of 5 miles of shoreline using native plants and seed mixes, and that helped with wildflowers to attract different flies, bees, butterflies, and pollinators into the area. Um, so I think they worked really hard on the ecologic vitalization. And then the recreational vitalization also for the humans was done pretty well too. So the new park includes 2 miles of paved walking trails, docks and fishing piers, boat ramps for canoe and kayaks, a pedestrian bridge that where people can fish. There's picnic areas, parking, and restroom facilities. So I guess my questions for everybody would be: do you feel like enough is being done? And do you think anything could have been done to prevent the spill? I didn't really go into all the details of the past history of the Tennessee, the whole Kingston plant, but I will tell you that um, give you some information that there had been small leaks for years and years, and basically it was they would put a band-aid on, which I think they thought was just um, good enough until just severe rains at the end of November and early of December of 2008. Just so much water and so much rain came down at one time that there was just no way that the containment could take place. So I want you to think about that if you think that um, something could have been done to prevent the spill. But also in the is enough being done, was enough done? As I said earlier, there's all the people that helped with the cleanup that are now um, either sick or dead and weren't provided the proper protective equipment, which they needed, so they weren't inhaling all the toxicants during the time of the cleanup. So for the future, what's being done so this doesn't happen again is the EPA, under the Resource Conservation Recovery Act, has been given the authority. It has the authority to control hazardous waste, and although coal ash isn't considered a hazardous waste, they are under the guides of the Resource Conservation Recovery Act. There's a framework for non-hazardous waste management, which coal ash is considered. So in December of 2014, the after about 6 years of lobbying and working to get signed into law, the EPA they signed the disposal of coal combustion residuals, and so that really gives them the ability to regulate and make sure that coal ash is disposed of properly. So, in summary, coal ash is the fine particulate pollutant byproduct of coal burning power plants, and the toxins involved are arsenic, lead, mercury, and selenium, which can cause neurologic damage to people and animals. And the EPA now regulates the requirements for safe disposal. And basically, all of this came about because of the Tennessee Valley Authority coal ash spill. It is only one of about thousands of coal producing plants in the United States, but it was this spill was a landmark in the realization that uh, things needed to be done to contain and prevent the hazardous dangers of large coal ash spills. And I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion.